I sold my apartment for $256,000. After that bank called, something wrong with your account. Come alone. $256,000.
Gone.
Not stolen from a stranger. Taken by someone who knew exactly where I kept my spare key, exactly which bank I used, and exactly how much trust one had in them. The call came 3 days after closing.
Come alone, they said.
I almost didn't. And when I walked into that bank and saw who was sitting in the manager's office, my stomach dropped through the floor. Because it wasn't a banker. It was someone I'd eaten dinner with the night before. I'm Stellan, 38, male. I'm a logistics coordinator for a mid-sized freight company out of Columbus, Ohio. Nothing glamorous. I move cargo from point A to point B on paper, make sure the numbers align, and keep the supply chain from having a nervous breakdown. I've been doing it for 11 years. I'm not rich. I'm not connected. I'm the kind of guy who saved for 6 years to buy a small apartment, rented it out for 4 more, and then sold it when the market was right because I needed the capital to finally buy a house with a yard, something real, something I could actually call mine. That apartment sale was the biggest financial transaction of my life. $256,000. After agent fees and closing costs, I cleared just under $231,000. I had it wired directly to my personal checking account at my bank, a regional bank I'd used for over a decade. The wire cleared on a Thursday. I remember staring at my banking app that night, at that number sitting there in my account, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Security. Like finally, the ground under me was solid. By Sunday it was gone. Not all of it, but enough of it that when I found out, I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. Let me back up. My brother-in-law had been living with me for about 8 months at the time of the sale. He's married to my younger sister. They'd hit a rough patch financially, and my sister had asked me, with those eyes she's had since she was 7 years old, if her husband could crash with me while they sorted things out. I said yes because I love my sister. Because I'm her older brother, and that's what you do. Because I thought I knew the man she married. My brother-in-law is the kind of guy who's always got a deal cooking. Always a scheme, always an angle, always something that's about to pop off. Over the 8 months he lived in my apartment, I heard about 6 different business opportunities that were each going to change everything. A dropshipping operation, a crypto arbitrage thing, a food truck partnership. None of them ever materialized. All of them, I noticed, required startup capital he was constantly trying to locate. He knew I was selling the apartment. He knew the timeline. He knew my bank. He'd seen my statements on the kitchen counter once. I hadn't been careful, because why would I be? He was family. He was living in my space on my generosity. I didn't think I needed to hide things from him. I did not understand who I was dealing with. The Friday after the wire cleared, my brother-in-law asked me, very casually over coffee, what I was planning to do with the money while I looked for a house. Was it just sitting and checking? Had I thought about putting it somewhere it could work for me? I said I hadn't decided yet, that I was meeting with a financial advisor the following week. He nodded. He said that was smart. He said he'd been reading about some short-term instruments that offered good returns. I didn't think much of it. He was always talking about financial stuff.
It was ambient noise at that point.
Saturday, he went to visit my sister. Said he'd be back Sunday. He came back Sunday afternoon, normal as anything, made a sandwich, watched football. Sunday night, he was gone. Not just visiting.
Gone. Suitcase gone.
The drawer where he kept his stuff in the bathroom, empty. The hook by the door where he always hung his keys, bare. I found a note on the kitchen table.
It said, "Sorry.
Had to go. You'll understand eventually." I stood in my kitchen holding that note for a long time. Then, I checked my banking app. The account showed 2 wire transfers that had gone out Saturday, one for $80,000 and one for $75,000. Together, $155,000. Gone to accounts I didn't recognize. I couldn't breathe. I'm not being dramatic. I actually could not get air into my lungs for what felt like a full minute. I sat down on the floor. Just sat there on my kitchen floor with my phone in my hand, and this number on my screen that made no sense because I had not authorized any transfers. I had not initiated anything. I had not even logged into my banking app that Saturday. But someone had. I called the bank's fraud line immediately. They confirmed the transfers had gone out. They confirmed they had been initiated through the online banking portal. They flagged the account and told me to come in first thing Monday morning. Then, at 7:12 Monday morning, before I'd even left the house, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. The person on the other end identified himself as the branch manager of my bank's downtown Columbus location. "Mr. Stellan," he said, "there's a situation with your account that we need to discuss in person.
Can you come in today?
And this is important. Please come alone. Don't bring anyone with you yet." The come alone stopped me cold. "Why alone?" I asked. He paused. "Because the situation involves someone known to you. We've already contacted the authorities, and we need your cooperation before anything else moves forward. If you bring that person with you, it complicates things significantly." I almost asked who. Then I realized I already knew. I drove downtown in a fog. I was led into the branch manager's office, and sitting across from him was a woman I didn't recognize, late 40s, sharp-looking, with a badge clipped to her jacket. She identified herself as a detective with the Columbus PD Financial Crimes Unit. There was also a man from the bank's fraud investigation team. They explained it to me piece by piece. My brother-in-law had used information he'd gathered, my account number, my online banking login, which he'd apparently lifted from my laptop during the week before he left, to initiate the transfers. He had also, and this is the part that made my jaw tighten, called the bank's customer service line on Saturday morning and, posing as me, answered the security questions correctly and authorized the transfers verbally. The security questions were basic ones: my mother's maiden name, my childhood street. Things he would have known from 8 months of living in my space and years of being family. He'd done the $80,000 first, waited 2 hours, then did the $75,000. The system had flagged the second one as a potential anomaly, but because the first had already cleared without triggering a full hold, and because the verbal authorization matched, it had gone through. "We should have called you," the branch manager said, and he had the decency to look genuinely ashamed. "The flag should have triggered a direct call to your registered number before the second transfer cleared. That's a failure on our end, and we are taking responsibility for it." That acknowledgement mattered. I noted it. The detective told me they had already traced both wire transfers. The $80,000 had gone to a newly opened account in a credit union in Indiana, opened 3 days before the transfer, in my brother-in-law's name. The $75,000 had gone to a second account that appeared to be connected to one of his business opportunities, a Shell LLC registered in Delaware. They already had a warrant for his arrest. They needed my formal statement, my signed fraud complaint, my authorization to cooperate with the investigation and the bank's recovery efforts. That's why they wanted me alone. They didn't want word getting back to him before the warrant was executed. I gave them everything they asked for. Every piece of paper. Every signature. I also gave the detective something she hadn't asked for. My phone, which had a text thread with my brother-in-law from the week before where he'd been casually asking questions about my banking setup. Not suspicious on their face, but in context, they were a roadmap. She photographed every message. Then I did something I want to be careful about how I describe because it was a choice I made deliberately, and I don't regret it. I called my sister. I know some people in this situation would have held off. Let the arrest happen first, let the chips fall. But my sister is not her husband. My sister didn't know. I was certain of that in my gut, and I've been certain of it every day since. I called her, and I told her what had happened, plainly, and without softening it. I heard the silence on her end that I recognized from when she was a kid and had done something wrong and didn't know how to respond. But this time the silence was different. This was the silence of someone whose world was being reorganized against their will. She said, "He's been at my place since Saturday." I told her to call the detective. I gave her the number. To her enormous credit, she did. Within the hour, my brother-in-law was arrested at my sister's apartment that same afternoon. He hadn't moved the money yet, not all of it. The Indiana Credit Union account still had $61,000 in it when authorities froze it. The Delaware LLC account had been partially dispersed, but $48,000 was recoverable. Total recoverable, $109,000 out of $155,000. That left a gap of $46,000. Here's where the entitled behavior went into full performance mode. After the arrest, my brother-in-law hired a defense attorney within 24 hours, which, on its own, was interesting because he was supposed to be broke. The attorney came out swinging. The first angle was that there had been a verbal agreement between us that I had agreed to lend him the money and that the transfers were part of that arrangement. That I was fabricating fraud to avoid honoring a private loan agreement. There was no loan agreement. There was no conversation about a loan. There was a note on my kitchen table that said, "Sorry," and a man who had emptied his bathroom drawer before I woke up. My attorney, who I hired immediately after the bank meeting, was meticulous. He pulled my call records. No calls between me and my brother-in-law on or before the date of the transfers that lasted more than 4 minutes. He pulled my text thread already in law enforcement hands. He obtained a statement from my financial advisor confirming that my stated plan, communicated in writing to their office, was to hold the funds in my account pending a house search, not to loan them. The loan agreement angle collapsed. Then the attorney tried a different approach. He argued that because my brother-in-law had been a resident of my home, he had a reasonable expectation of access to shared financial information and that the transfers were part of a business partnership discussion that had gone sideways. This was a creative argument. It was also complete fiction, and the detective's documentation, the newly opened Indiana account, the Delaware Shell LLC, the fact that he'd fled before I woke up Sunday, made the business partnership story fall apart on contact with reality. The bank's liability piece moved on a parallel track. Because the second transfer had flagged and they had failed to call me before clearing it, their internal review determined they bore partial responsibility for the loss of the $75,000 transfer. After several weeks of negotiation between my attorney and the bank's legal team, the bank agreed to restore $60,000 of the $75,000 transfer amount as a settlement, without admitting full liability, in exchange for my signed release of claims against them related to the transfer protocol failure. I took the deal. $60,000 back was $60,000 back. So, at that point my recoverable total was $109,000 from frozen accounts plus $60,000 from the bank settlement. That's $169,000. Against a total loss of $155,000, I was actually net positive on the recovery by $14,000, which sounds good until you account for attorney fees, the weeks of stress, and the $46,000 gap that the criminal proceedings still had to address. My brother-in-law's criminal case moved through the system. In Ohio, unauthorized use of computer systems to commit theft, combined with the wire fraud elements and the impersonation of an account holder, stacks up quickly. The charges included identity theft, unauthorized access to a computer system, wire fraud, and theft by deception. The wire fraud charge alone, given the dollar amounts involved, put him in felony territory with serious sentencing exposure. He pled guilty to 3 of the 4 charges as part of a negotiated plea. The judge sentenced him to 30 months in a state facility, plus full restitution of the unrecovered funds. Restitution orders are civil judgments attached to criminal sentences. They follow a person through bankruptcy, through release, through everything. He would owe me the remaining gap amount for the rest of his legally documented life if necessary. The day of sentencing, his attorney made a statement to the court about his client's remorse, his difficult financial situation, his love for his family. I sat in the gallery, and I listened to every word, and I felt nothing in particular about any of it. Remorse is useful before you do the thing, not after you get caught. The marriage to my sister didn't survive. She filed for divorce within 2 months of the arrest, and I want to say clearly, I never asked her to, never pressured her, never said a word about it. That was her decision, completely her own, and she made it because she's a lot tougher than people give her credit for. She moved back to Columbus, got a new job, started rebuilding. I see her every couple of weeks. We go to the same diner we used to go to when we were kids, and we split a piece of pie, and mostly we talk about things that have nothing to do with any of this. That part is the part that actually matters. I found a house. 3 bedrooms, small yard, detached garage. Closed on it about 7 months after everything settled. The morning after I got the keys, I drove over there at 6 a.m. and just sat in the driveway in my car for a while looking at it, thinking about how many times that money had been in danger, how close I came to losing everything I'd spent 6 years building. How much worse it would have been if I hadn't checked my app that Sunday night. If I'd waited until Monday morning to notice. If I hadn't documented everything. If I hadn't called the bank immediately. 48 more hours, and that money would have been dispersed beyond any realistic recovery point. The ground under me is solid again. It took a while to stop flinching every time my phone rang.
But it's solid. I'll take that.
He answered all the security questions. Knew the childhood street, knew the mother's maiden name, knew the account number, knew the login, because he'd been living in the man's house eating his food and pretending to be family for 8 months. So, I need to know, what security question would you have used that your brother-in-law definitely wouldn't know the answer to? Drop it in the comments, because clearly childhood street name is retirement-level protection at this point. And if someone has ever used your trust as a master key to rob you blind, tell us about it below, because this comment section is about to become a support group and a crime documentary at the same time. Subscribe if you want more stories about people who confused family with free pass and found out exactly how wrong they were.